Spring lawn care, and the way I really like to think about it is how to save your water bill. In here by Idaho Falls, the city of Ammon is billing residents now for their water bill at home. They have a certain amount that they'll allow them for household purposes, and then after that, they get charged an extra fee. Part of the reason for that is all the water in Idaho has been adjudicated. So there's no more new water. You can't come up with something that's not there. And so the city of Ammon has a limit on the amount of water that they have available. And part of the way that they're trying to control, make sure that there's adequate for, it's kind of an expanding part of Idaho Falls area. They are putting a price on that water. So they have a financial reason for wanting to control, limit or reduce their water. Now I'm on a well and it cost me, I had to pay the power company to pump the water. And so economically it costs me more to irrigate than to not irrigate. So it is a water bill kind of a situation. And that's kind of how I've approached this presentation tonight is we want to have good, healthy lawns, but we also want to make sure that we are being smart about how we do it. So my objectives tonight are to help you learn how to have your lawn be more drought tolerant and conserve water that way through proper fertilization, mowing, and irrigation. And then if we get time, we'll have a little bit of time. We'll talk about weed control as well. That's not a water saving issue. That's a little bit different kind of a thing. But these other things can actually have an effect on your water usage in your lawn. Kentucky bluegrass in our landscapes is one of the biggest users of water that we have. So there's a price we pay. All right, fertilizer. Now, out of all management practices, proper fertilization is the most common problem. There might be some more than that. All right, so I'm going to pop up another poll question here. What is the most limiting nutrient for lawns? Is it nitrogen, phosphate, or potash? Generally speaking, kind of depends on your soil, but the nitrogen is the most limiting because nitrogen is very volatile. It will move with the water. So if you over irrigate, you push your water, you push your nitrogen down past the lawn roots. If it's wet and exposed to the air, it will volatilize into the air. You know, we have more nitrogen in our air than we have oxygen in our air. And so the nitrogen is the one that we have to keep replacing all the time. And we'll talk about that as we go through the presentation. So how much? Well, when we're talking about fertilizer, we're going to talk about how much, what kind of fertilizer, when to fertilize, and then how to do it. You know, different tools we use for applying that fertilizer. Now, how much I should use, the best way to do it is to do a soil sample. You do that test, you take a sample, you send it into a lab that's to analyze the soil and determine how much you would need to put down. You can ask for a nitrogen test, but the assumption is we always need to add a certain amount of nitrogen. We'll talk about that in a minute. But phosphorus and potassium are the ones you really want to take a look at, and maybe even sulfur to see, are we deficient in phosphorus, potassium, and sulfur? So that's what you're going to be looking for in a soil test. The rule of thumb is that you apply a ½ pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet of lawn each month of active grass growth. So here in the Idaho Falls area, we're looking at maybe April, a little bit of April. We got May, we got June, we got July, we got August, we got September, and a good share of October. So we're looking at 7.5, 8 months of grass growth here in the Idaho Falls area. So a ½ pound per 1,000 square feet, that would put us around 3 to 4 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. That's not 3 or 4 pounds of fertilizer, it's 3 to 4 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. So that's kind of that rule of thumb. So depending on how you manage it, you can drop that down to a couple pounds of nitrogen or all the way up to 4 pounds of nitrogen. If it's a heavy traffic lawn with lots of use and you're bagging everything, taking all the clippings off, then you're probably getting up closer to the 4 pounds of nitrogen. So are you going to mulch your clippings or are you going to bag your clippings? That has an effect. If you mulch your clippings, you can be down closer to the 2 pounds of nitrogen. If you bag your clippings and take it off and put it around whatever, compost it or throw it in the landfill, then that's going to make it so that you'll have to put more nitrogen on because you're taking a lot of nitrogen off. And also it's going to make it so that you're taking off phosphorus and potassium as well. If you mulch your clippings, you'll be putting the nitrogen back on, but you'll also be putting the phosphorus and potassium back on. And although the nitrogen is volatile, the phosphorus and potassium is not, and it'll stay there. And so you don't have to add the phosphorus and potassium, nitrogen, or fertilizer as much as you would if you were bagging it. So another reason for mulching. There's some other reasons we'll talk about here in a little bit too. So what kind of fertilizer are we talking about? Again, the soil test is a really good one. Are you bagging or mulching your clippings and all that kind of stuff? So that would have that effect. Now, these numbers right here, we're not going to get into this really heavy, but the numbers is, the first one is nitrogen, then phosphorus or phosphate, and then potassium or potash. So N, P, and K are the letters that we use in that order. So 20%, this fertilizer is 20% nitrogen. There's no phosphorus, there's no potassium. Now it's ammonium sulfate, so there's also sulfur in there as well. So that's actually a pretty good fertilizer for your lawn. As long as you got the phosphorus and potassium and you don't have to replace it, then the ammonium sulfate is a good lawn fertilizer. Especially with our alkaline soils, our soils are fairly basic, and so that helps. So that's what, and you can use, back up on, you can use the 16-8-8 or the 10-20-10, or look at the fancy bags they have at the nursery. But you don't have to pay for that fancy stuff. If you have the phosphorus and potassium, all you need is a nitrogen. So ammonium sulfate is good. If you're short on the phosphorus and potassium, then you'll need to add the phosphorus and potassium to your fertilizer program. So a soil test will tell you that. Now, when do you apply the fertilizer? It's best if you use a slow release fertilizer that will release over 60 to 90 days or something like that. And it'll say on the bag kind of how slow that releases. You can apply it once and maybe again another application later in the fall. But I like to do the ammonium sulfate because it's a lot cheaper. And so I put it out. Your first application, if you miss your fall application, especially, you want to get an early application in. But you do that late April, early May here in Idaho Falls area. And if you're like in Twin Falls or Boise, it's going to be earlier than that, or even northern Idaho. We're kind of on the cold part of the state here. So that late April, early May, as grass starts to green up, you put some fertilizer out. That'll help to get that boost. Then again, about Memorial Day, it'd be a second application, early June. I wouldn't do it past mid-June because then we're getting into the hot part of the season, and we'll talk about why that's not really a good issue. We do a last one would be early September, around Labor Day, kind of the last regular application. And then this is probably the most important fertilizing that we have on here is this after dormancy, before the ground freezes, but after dormancy. So it's after your last lawn mowing kind of a thing. It's not going to encourage the grass to grow anymore before winter sets in. You put in about half of that rate. So if you're putting on 3 pounds, 3.5 pounds of fertilizer, those first 3 you put on 1 pound each time, and then the last one you put on about 1/2 pound. You want that to be lighter because a heavy fertilization in the fall can actually encourage certain diseases, fungal diseases, some of your molds and things like that. So you want to not have a really heavy over-fertilized lawn, and so keep that in mind. Now, if it's not a high traffic use and your lawn is healthy and you're clipping your lawn and all that, and you're mulching the clippings back into the lawn, you can cut that back and almost cut that in half. I would still apply it at those 3 different times, again, if you're not doing the slow release fertilizer. But you do that, and that will help the lawn to be healthy, actively growing, and solve a lot of the problems. But here's the key. If you're not using the slow release fertilizer, you do not want to put on more than 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. so if you back up now, what's 1 pound of nitrogen? The easiest way to do it, we'll back up to this right here. You've got 20% of this 50-pound bag is nitrogen. 50% of the 20% of the 50-pound bag is nitrogen fertilizer. So if you multiply 0.2, which is 20%, by 50, that says you've got 10 pounds of nitrogen in that 50-pound bag of fertilizer. So if I've got a 10,000 square foot lawn, I would use this whole bag to put down 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. You get 10,000 square feet, 1 pound per 1,000 square feet. So basically, you just multiply that by the percentage. Now, the application methods, there's different ways that you can get the fertilizer out there. You can do it with a hose end sprayer. If you've got a very big lawn, this would be pretty tedious. In Idaho, if you're going to do it through your sprinkler system, you have to be certified with a chemigation fertigation certification through the Idaho State Department of Agriculture, and you have to have specific equipment set up. So unless you're really into it, I wouldn't do it through the sprinkler system, but that's the law. That's to keep it from, so that you understand how to not let that fertilizer suck back into the groundwater or into the city water system or whatever. So you have to have a good system for that. You can use the broadcast type spreader. Now, if you got a big lawn, that's a pretty small, you have to go over that lawn a lot of times with that little tiny broadcast spreader, hold about a pound or two, probably a couple pounds maybe of fertilizer in that. You can do it this way. You get a lot of smiley faces on your lawn if you broadcast that by hand. I would wear gloves if I was doing that, but you get smiley faces on your lawn. It's not a really good way of getting spread. You can do a pretty decent job, but it's not going to be a really good job. And then there's this drop spreader where you're going along and it's dropping it straight down below. So the broadcast spreader, and they've got those in push carts too. I'll show you a picture in a minute. But the broadcast spreader is going to spread it out and make it even. You still want to overlap and go crossways, different directions. If you're going to be using this drop spreader especially, you have to be very careful about how you apply that. And this is why. You like the green American flag kind of a thing. You can't space it out. You've got to be right. Those wheel tracks have got to be right on top of each other so that you get a good pattern. Here's another nice one. I guess if you're going to play fox and goose in your lawn during the summertime, you should do it in the snow, but do it in the summertime, there's your goose trail. So really the best one for large lawns, it would be a broadcast spreader. This is the one that I use, and it'll hold a lot more fertilizer in it. It's my lawn. I got over 10,000 square feet of lawn, which is crazy to me, but that's the way it is right now. I just moved in this house a year ago. I'm working on it. But anyway, I've got that much lawn, and to use the little tiny broadcast spreader just takes too long, keeping track of where you've been and everything. So that's a good way to fertilize. And I know those others are good. You just have to be aware of the limitations. All right, so that's the fertilizer. Now, mowing. Of all this quote will sound pretty familiar after a little bit. This is the actual quote, by the way. Of all management practices, setting mower blades to the correct height is the most common problem. I said before, it was a fertilizer, proper fertilization is the most common problem. All right, this is the actual quote. And so setting that mower blade, and there's reasons for that. Let's go, let's do another poll. True or false, mowing height has a direct effect on root depth. Okay, it looks like everybody's thinking very clearly on this one. Yes, yes, and yes. So we'll talk about that. So what we'll talk about here on mowing height is how high and how often. Mowing is very, very important to helping develop a drought-resistant or drought-tolerant lawn. So first of all, your weed competition, your proper mowing height, you'll get the weed competition will be greatly reduced because you don't have as much light. The seeds they germinate. They may germinate, but they can't get up to the light as well. And so that really helps out. Here's a research that's done back at Penn State. the effective mowing height, this here on the left. Here on the left, they mowed this at 1 inch, and the center is a 1 3/4, and here's 2.5 inches. And the spurge infestation was much higher in the 1 inch than it was in the 2 inch, 2.5 inch. So just from weed control perspective alone, the mowing height is very important. And then also, the deeper the roots, the more drought tolerant the grass is going to be. Just think about it like a gas tank. You've got the roots are pulling out of this gas tank. Well, if you've got a 6-inch gas tank, you don't have nearly the amount of moisture there as if you had a 12-inch gas tank for those roots to draw from. So we want deeper roots. And here's some research they've done. This one, they cut the grass at 1/4 inch, and you look how shallow those roots are. Here the grass is cut at 3/4 inch, and I've done a lot of lawn care. That's kind of how I put myself through school, do a lawn care business. And some people, they want it cut short. They want it like a golfing green, and you try to tell them, hey, you're just gonna have to water more. You're gonna have to more often, and all different weed problems and things like that. And so then they put lots of chemicals out there and poison the whole environment. Anyway, so then the 1.5 inch clipping, and then this one was not clipped at all. So you look at the difference in the root mass of those, very significant. The rule is the longer the blade, the deeper the root. So the deeper the root, the larger the gas tank. All right, mower height then. The suggested for lawns, for Kentucky bluegrass, is 2.5 to 3 inches. Now I don't do that. I set my mower as high as it will go, which is about 3.5 to 4 inches. And that's where I cut mine at, okay? The deeper, the longer the blade, the deeper the root. And so I want to have a drought tolerant. I'll talk about that here in just a minute. Why? Adjust those mower blades so you can adjust them throughout the year. The first one and the last one. Don't adjust any others. So your first one, you can do it shorter if you want to. And that kind of gets that the brown stuff from the wintertime cleaned up so that the green grass pops up through there quicker. So you get a little bit faster green up. It doesn't make any difference. Typically, if you're going to do that, you're going to want to bag it. I don't usually bag my first clipping. I will bag my last clipping of the year, but I don't typically bag any of them other than that one. And so it just gets it so it'll green up a little bit faster. It's not hurting, especially if it's just the brown stuff you're cutting off. It's not going to hurt the lawn at all. And so you just let it come along and up you go. And there it's looking good. Now the last one, you want to mow that one pretty short. And this is after the grass has gone dormant. You want to mow that one pretty short because the tall long grass gets that snow mold in a lot worse than a shorter mowed grass will. So if you have a winter like we had here this last year with lots of snow, when the snow just stays on the grass in the fall, in the winter time, and then in the springtime, you still got that pile, especially on the north side of your house and fences and things like that. That snow mold will build up on it. So you can mow that last one, and that's the one that I will bag off. But everything else I mulch back into the lawn. As much as possible, now they say never, but that's almost impossible to do that. As much as possible, do not remove more than 1/3 of the height of the grass, okay? So that means if your mower height is at 3 inches, and you're going to remove 1/3 of that, and it means your grass can be 4.5 inches long, and then you need to mow it. Okay, if I set my mower height, my grass at 4 inches, my mower at 4 inches, my grass can be 6 inches long, and I've only taken off 1/3. So kind of keep that in mind. Also, it would have some effect not only on the root depth, but how often you need to mow if you're going to follow that rule as religiously as possible. Okay, and then how often? Ideally, in the springtime, you're looking at 4 or 5 days between mowing because the grass is growing really fast. You don't want to remove more than 1/3 of the grass blade. And so you're out there a lot. In the summertime, things slow way down. We got cool season grasses. And so summertime, you can go 10 days between mowings and not have it be a problem. Practically once a week is pretty good. So you're going to be, in the springtime, you're going to be taking off more than 1/3 of the blade. In the summertime, you're going to be taking off less than 1/3 of the blade. and that's okay. Really important though, sharpen the blades regularly, because if you don't sharpen your mower blades, what that does, that tears the surface. And so if you look at your grass, you go out and look at your grass and see, is it got brown tips, kind of jagged down there, a 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch down the blade? Well, that's because that's been torn off instead of cut off. Okay, if it's cut off nice and smooth with a sharp blade, then you'll get a touch of brown, but it's not going to brown down that 1/4 or 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch down, kind of giving a tan sheen to your lawn. So sharpen your blades regularly. Okay, any questions at this point, Lena?
Nope, not so far.
Okay, now irrigation. Does this quote sound familiar yet? Out of all management practices, proper irrigation is the most common problem. And this one, I would say, is really the true, it's not the true quote, but this is really the true statement. I see a lot of improper irrigation, so we're going to spend a fair amount of time on irrigation. So let's go to our next poll. The automatic sprinkler timer is the best tool for water conservation. Is that true, false, or it depends? All right, so it depends is the extension educator's favorite answer. And that really is true. It depends it depends on how you manage it. And so we'll get into that. We'll talk about that. So here's a picture of this is my controller. Notice I took this yesterday. It is turned off. Now, I would love to ask a question and see how many of you have your lawn sprinkler system turned on automatically and it's set. Okay. That is the worst thing you can be doing for your lawn and for water conservation. This time of year, I let my lawn tell me when it needs to be watered. And I never, even during the hot part of summer, I don't water my lawn more than once a week. And we'll talk about that. So my question here is, does your controller control you? In other words, a lot of people have a lawn care business come and take care of their lawn, and they control the irrigation and all that kind of stuff. But they turn it on so that it turns on 3 times a week and it runs for 20 minutes or whatever the case may be, 3 times a week, which doesn't tell me anything, first of all, because I have no idea what the precipitation rate is. But if you're in the city of Ammon, they're not paying your water bill. You're paying the water bill. So you take control of the controller rather than the controller taking control of you. You can set it so that it's going on. And this time of year, let's see, I've run my water 1 time so far this year. It was in early May. I was about ready to turn it on last Saturday. Then we got the snowstorm and rain, so that put me off. So I had to do it again. So, 1 time I've irrigated once already, and my lawn looks really good. So, why do I need to have it going on 2 or 3 times a week already? It's wasting water and it does some really serious problems. So do you set and forget? That is the biggest problem with these automatic controllers. You set them and in the springtime and you turn them off in the fall. That's the worst thing you can do. It really is not a good way to manage these. They're a great tool. They're a wonderful tool. And so if you're out there and you're watching your lawn, you check and see, okay, I got a little bit of a spot. I've got a spot out there that's a little bit dry. I'll drag a hose out to it. I don't have any problem dragging the hose. If it's showing more general drying of the whole area or a bigger area, then okay, yeah, maybe it's time to turn on the sprinklers. Now, also we've had a lot of wind, and that's always an issue. So you have to water when it's not windy. You don't have any control of that. If you just have it set on automatically, it's windy, it turns on. If it's not windy, it turns on, and it turns on, and it keeps turning on. So the controller is a wonderful tool, and it can be a really good tool for conserving water, but you got to control it. All right, again, this picture of this root depth. Now, when we're talking about irrigation scheduling, we need to know a few things. We need to know the root depth. Typical healthy bluegrass is going to be 8 to 12 inches deep. Now, if you have been watering properly, especially in the springtime, your grass roots may be that deep. And that would be good because then that will add to your drought tolerance. So this is determined by your spring irrigation. This root depth through the summertime is determined by the spring irrigation. You water it a lot. The roots go where the water is. And so the water's right there in the shallow. That's where the roots are. And then all of a sudden it turns off hot. And that's when I start getting phone calls about something's wrong with my lawn. It's got brown spots in it. You go and look at it, and it's very obviously a watering issue. They think, I've got bugs or I got some other disease or something. And a lot of times it's just a watering issue. So that springtime watering, that's the time to train your lawn. Do it now. Don't wait. So let it go. Let it go until it starts telling you when it's time to irrigate. I have some pretty sophisticated tools I use to determine when it's time to irrigate. First of all, I look, and then the other thing I look at is, I have a screwdriver, a long, 6 to 8 inch long screwdriver, and I'll take that out with me and I'll stick it down in the ground. And if I can push it down in the ground without a whole lot of force, I'm gonna push it down fairly tough, depends on your soil type. If I can push it into the ground is wet enough that I don't have to irrigate. Now, if I get to where I can push it down 2 or 3 inches, it starts getting pretty tough, then I'm going to start watching really closely, and I'll probably need to irrigate within the next day or so. So screwdriver, and use your eyes. Check your lawn. Whenever you're outside, whenever you come home from work, whenever you go outside to get the mail, whatever it is, check the lawn, look at it, looks good. Take a screwdriver out there once in a while so that you can kind of get a feel for it and say, yeah, it still looks good. And I can push the screwdriver in and everything's looking good, so I don't have to worry about it. Now, I've got a dry spot on this lawn. Again, it's not my design of irrigation system. And so there are things I'm going to be changing. So I've got a spot now that I know I need to watch. And I've got a spot in the backyard that I don't have to water it very often at all. So anyway, learn those kinds of things about your lawn. Okay, now keep in mind that we have cool season grasses. All right, cool season grasses have a specific growth pattern we'll talk about in a few minutes. But the other thing is to also, what are your expectations? Now, I talked about I don't water my lawn more than once a week. And my expectations are that the cool season grass will stay healthy and strong, but it will go through its natural, normal growth cycle. And this is what it's like. In the springtime, the cool season grasses, the roots start to grow. This isn't how high you mow it. This is how fast it's growing. This is representation of the growth of that. And so the roots grow down, the grass grows faster, and then the roots start to slow down a little bit, and the grass starts to slow down. So they're in the July period right here. You've got the grass kind of goes in siesta. It doesn't go brown. If it goes brown, then we got some problems. But if it kind of goes a less lush green, and with me, that's okay. I don't care. That's fine as long as the grass is healthy. Now, I tried this last year. Again, this is my second summer with this property here. Last year, I was doing this, and towards the end of the summer, it was my water pressure was dropping way down. My house pressure was fine, but it's the water pressure out in the yard. What's going on? I couldn't figure it out. And so I started looking a little bit spotty. And finally I got down, I better check my system. And so I went into the pump house, and the filter was put on backwards. So it was collecting sand in the cup, and it was reducing the amount of water was going through. So I had to replace that. Anyway, got it fixed, works great. So be aware of those kinds of things. But just be aware of this growth curve. What are your expectations? If you want a lush green lawn throughout the whole summer with this cool season grass, then you're going to have to water it more, which is a waste of water. Okay, the grass will not go. It'll be fine. It'll be healthy. You may have to deal with a little bit with some of the weed problems, so some of the summer weeds, summer annuals, when you do this, but the grass comes back into fall, comes back into spring. It's doing really well. Now, the other option would be to grow a warm season grass. There's a problem with warm season grasses in that it does not brown up until about now, the end of May is when it starts to green up. It doesn't brown up. It doesn't green up until it starts to warm up. That's a warm season grass. And so it's been so cool this spring here in Idaho Falls that the grass would not have been greening up yet. It would still be sitting there brown, waiting for warm season for it. And then it turns green, and it's nice and green during the hot part of the summer. And then when it cools down in August and early September, it goes brown again. And so you've got that different season with the warm season grass. It's like buffalo grass would be probably the most common turf type grass that you would have warm season around here. The zoysia grasses and St. Augustine's and things like that, they don't survive here very well. They're not a good choice. So if you want the warm season grass, buffalo grass, a little hard to get established, but it does okay. You don't have to mow it very often. It doesn't get very tall. And so it's fine. If you want the Kentucky blue look, Kentucky bluegrass kind of a look, and you want to keep it lush during the middle part of the summer when it's hot, you're going to be wasting a lot of water to keep it that way. And, why are you wasting it? I guess is kind of my question. So rooting depth, we need to know that root depth. So factors then that affect root depth, you got your genetics, you got the mowing height. We've talked a bit about that. The longer the blade, the deeper the root. Now hard pan compaction can also cause rooting depth problems. I've got a trail where my dog trails through the backyard from the garage door to the gate. That's her trail right there. And until she's gone, it's just going to be that way because I'm not going to fight that particular issue. But the rest of the lawn looks great. It doesn't have that compaction kind of thing. So that can really seriously reduce your root depth, having a hard pan a few inches down underneath the soil through traffic and things like that. And then again, your irrigation practices, we talked about that quite a bit. All right, so also what helps to know on this irrigation schedule is soil texture. Now, texture is the mineral component of the soil. It doesn't have anything to do with the organic matter. So it's sand, silt, and clay. How much sand, silt, and clay does your soil have? So if it's a really heavy, sticky clay soil, now up in the Palouse, you've got that wind-blown loess, which is probably fairly heavy clay and maybe a little bit of silt in there, not much sand in most of your places up in that area. Here in Idaho Falls, depends on where you are in relationship to the river. We may have sandy spots, and we've got clay spots, and then we've got, like my yard's just a bunch of rocks, gravelly spots. And so your soil texture, the components of that sand, silt, and clay will have a determination on how much water, and we'll talk to root depth, how big the gas tank is, and then how much water that gas tank will actually hold in that root depth area. So that's what the texture tells us. And so when we look at this water holding capacity of the soil, let's back up again. We've got this sandy loam or clay loam or silt loam or clay, or here's a silt and over here's a sand or loamy sand. All these names for percentage of silt, percentage of sand, percentage of clay. So the more clay there will be in the title. The more silt will be there in the title. So when we look at these then, these coarse sands, these fine sands, sandy, clay loams, silty loams, silts, and clays, this is where your sands will fall into. You're looking at about really coarse sand, you're looking about 3/4 of an inch to maybe 1.5 inches maximum on your sandy soils. They're not going to hold a lot of water in that, and that's in a foot of soil. So if you've got a 12-inch root on your grass, which would be really good, you can hold 1.5 inches, maybe. Inch is probably a better target to think about with that. So that's where it is on the sandies. Now in the loams, you've got more equal parts of the silt and clay and the sand all together, and it actually holds a lot more water. You've got the smaller particles that the water is adhering to, and you got the airspace in there because you've got the sand in it. And so it actually holds up to 2.5 inches of water in a foot of soil. So that gives us not only a bigger gas tank, but the carrying capacity of the gas tank is a lot bigger too. And then on your clays, it's actually smaller particles. It can actually hold more water, but because of the structure of the clay, it doesn't give up that water very easily. And so your available water is actually less in the clay soil than it is in the loamy soil. And all loam means is we've got a good mixture of sand, silt, and clay. Okay, that's what loam means. It has nothing to do with organic matter. So again, we're looking at, we're just only dealing basically with 12 inches. And if your soil or your roots are only going to be 6 inches deep, you're going to have to cut that in half. The thing that we want to do is we want to replace, we only want to run on the top half of the gas tank. And so this is the available water, but we don't want to go below a half tank of gas. So if you've got a silty soil, a sandy soil, and you figure, okay, I can hold an inch of water in that sandy soil, you're going to want to replace a half inch every time you irrigate. Okay, let it use up that half inch and then put a half inch out. Let it use up that half inch and put a half inch out. If you got a loamy soil, you can let it use up an inch and a quarter and then put out an inch and a quarter, put out an inch and a quarter. And then if you got a clay soil, you're looking at more about 3/4 of an inch and then back in 3/4 of an inch. So that's kind of what you need to think about on that water holding capacity of the soil. All right, now the precipitation. We've looked at the rooting depth, how much soil that hole can hold. So for 12 inches, we know how much water that soil can hold. Then how much do we put down? Now we're talking about how long are we going to have to run the irrigation system to put down that inch and a quarter or inch or 3/4 of an inch, depending on your soil type. How long does it take to fill that root zone? 20 minutes tells me nothing. I ask people, I've got problems with my lawn. How much do you put down when you irrigate? Oh, I run it for 20 minutes. Tells me nothing. I have no idea what your precipitation rate is. 20 minutes could be an inch and a half of water, or it could be 1/4 of an inch of water. So you need to know more than time. You need to figure out the precipitation rate of your system. And so that's what this is about here. Fairly simple way to do it. If you get a bunch of soup cans, don't do tuna fish cans are too shallow. They'll splash out. So get soup cans, get a bunch of them and put them out around your yard and space them out fairly evenly through the zone and run it for a half hour. And then go and measure the average of those soup cans. And that's your average precipitation rate. Now, keep in mind, if you do average, you're going to have some spots be a little bit wet and some spots are going to be a little bit dry. But in this case, let's say we ran the system for 30 minutes, we measured the 3/4 of an inch per can on average. And so the hourly precipitation rate, because we ran it for 30 minutes, the hourly precipitation rate would be 1.5 inches of water. So if we're replacing an inch of water, we don't need to run it for a full hour. So then we do the runtime then is the usable water divided by the precipitation rate per hour. So the precipitation rate per hour is 1.5. If your available water is 1.2 inches, so you've got a loamy soil, your available water, loamy soil, and your precipitation rate is 15. Now, remember, we're working on the top half of the gas tank. It's actually 2.5. We're working on the top half of the gas tank. So 1.2 inches of water for divided by the, it shouldn't be, the 1.5 inches per hour, multiply that by 60, and that'll tell you how many minutes you need to run the system. So 1.2 divided by 1.5 divided by 1, it's going to an hour. So 1.2 divided by 1.5 is 60, and so it comes up times 60. I'm sorry, it comes up 0.8, and that's how many hours it is. So you multiply that by 60, and it'll give you 48 minutes. That's how long you would need to run this system to get 1.2 inches of water on average over your lawn. Again, keep in mind that's an average. If your distribution uniformity is way off, you got some really dry spots where you got very little water that was caught in the can, and you got some spots where the can was almost full. If your distribution uniformity is way off, then you'll have some dry spots and you'll have some soggy spots. Okay, so the key then is to try to get that distribution uniformity. You'll never get 100%, but if you can get as close as you can, to a, like a 70% distribution uniformity. That's pretty good for most lawn irrigation systems. So if you can do that and then run that for about 48 minutes every time you irrigate, you run it every time you irrigate, because you're going to replace 1.2 inches of water in this example. That's how long you'd run it. Now, if you have a sandy soil and you're only going to be putting down a 0.6 instead of 1.2, 0.6, then your precipitation rate is 0.4 times 60. So you 24 minutes, you'd run it for 24 minutes to put down 0.6 inches of water. And then you'd have to do it more often, because the grass is going to use the same amount of water regardless of the soil type it is. So you'd have to do it more often with the sandy soil. And then use a hose on dry spots. It's not bad to drag a hose around. Matter of fact, back when I was a kid, my dad irrigated that big lawn. He did it by hose. And he kept a good lawn, but he wasn't wasting any water on it either, because you're not going to be dragging hose and be watching and managing it that much that way. Okay, so we got the rooting depth, we talked about the soil texture, we talked about the system precipitation rate, and now the irrigation frequency. And that changes with the season. As the grass grows, it may be fine. When it gets hot, you're going to have to be using a little bit more, because you want to overcome that heat tendency of the grass to go on siesta during the hot part of the summer. So you can go in the springtime, you may be able to go for, like in my case, it's been 3 weeks since I irrigated my lawn. So here's kind of just a rule of thumb. In April, you're looking at about 9 to 10 days between irrigations. In May, you're looking at about 6 to 7. In June, 5 to 6. In July, 4 to 5. August, you're starting to get back out again, 5 to 6. And then September, 8 to 9. October, you're back out to 10 or 11 days. Again, it depends on precipitation rate. Now, a 1/4 inch of rain does not a lot of irrigation make. So you may be able to bump a day, but you're not gonna be able to bump a week. This rainstorm we had last Saturday, it's bumped it out. So I'm not, haven't been watering yet since then. Okay, so let's say in August, you're gonna 5 to 6 days. Just kind of be aware that as it changes. So here's your average daily water use. And so that's why you have to water more frequently. Your water holding capacity for a coarse soil is 0.5, for a smooth soil is 1 inch, and for a loamy soil, 1.2 inches. And so your days on a sandy soil, your days between irrigations would be 2 to 3 days, and you'd be putting down a lot less water. That's what that chart is. This is the important part. Irrigation frequency is adjusted throughout the year, not the run time. Right? Remember, we talked about the fertilizer is very soluble. The nitrogen is very soluble, and it goes where the water goes. If you run longer past the root zone, you'll be flushing your fertilizer past the grass, and you're wasting money on fertilizer. So as the days get warmer, you're going to water a little more frequently. Now, as it gets into June and we get a lot less rain, I will be watering more frequently. And again, I turn my system off. When I go on vacation, I turn it on automatic, so it'll turn on when I'm gone. But if I'm not gone on vacation, I'm still looking at the lawn, and I'm pushing it to no more than once a week during the summertime. Now, if it gets really bad, then I may, but that's my goal, is to not water more than once a week, because I don't care if it goes into semi-dormancy during the middle of summer. So again, here's the cool season grass. All right, what are your expectations? Do you want to have a lush grass? Are you okay with that summer dormancy? You go back east and they think, man, you guys are crazy. You're irrigating your lawns. They don't irrigate their lawns back there. Most of them, they grows, and then it goes dormant during the summer or semi-dormant during the summer, and then it starts growing again in the fall. and they go on vacation when they don't have to mow so much in the summertime. They're crazy. Of course, you know, we're drier here. They get a little bit better rainfall than we do pattern. And so we kind of have to irrigate these grasses because they take more than they really require more than we give them through our natural rainfall. Now, some grasses like the turf type fescue it's a little coarser grass, not the red fescue, but the turf type tall fescue. It's a little coarser grass and not much, so they've got some really fine ones. And it's a little bit more drought tolerant, has deeper root. And so the genetics of the turf type tall fescue is better for drought tolerance. Now, most of our lawns are Kentucky bluegrass. Kentucky bluegrass needs about 23 inches of water. So water, according to these, let the lawn tell you when it needs to be watered. Don't just turn on the sprinkler and let it go. Okay, we'll cover the weed control. Again, this doesn't have anything to do with water conservation. Weed control is not an issue. We talked about fertilizer, we talked about mowing height, we talked about irrigation. Those three things, if you do it properly, your lawn will stay nice and green during the summer, and you'll save water. Okay, it's just that's the way it is. So let's go ahead and move on. We'll talk about weed control issues a little bit here. So here's that quote again. Out of all management practices, weed control is the most common problem. Yeah, when you're looking at your neighbor's lawn and all those dandelions there, right? Or the black medic, or your crabgrass, or all kinds of problems we have in the lawns. Now, part of the problem is that we expect to have a lush, perfect, uniform monoculture type lawn, and that's not necessarily, I mean, that's not the way nature planned it, but we're fighting nature when we do that. Now, keep in mind, dandelions spread to your neighbors, and so weeds do not good neighbors make. The best weed control is, select one, a pre-emergent fall application, a pre-emergent spring application, a post-emergent spring application, a post-emergent fall application, or a healthy lawn. Okay, we'll end that poll there. And yes, it is. A healthy lawn is the best control for weeds. So if we can follow those things that we talked about earlier, most of your weeds are not going to even get a foothold into your lawn, even when they blow in from the neighbor's property. Every now and again, you'll get some that'll pop in. The dandelions are kind of an exception to that rule. They seem to kind of just show up. So now my dad, like I said, my dad had a large family, a lot of boys. There were 9 of us boys. And so to keep us busy in the springtime, we raked a lot of lawn. We dug a lot of dandelions and that kind of thing. All right, so irrigation influence. Now this is on weed control. Irrigation influence on weeds. We're talking about weed control now. So if you do deep and infrequent, we talked about that. Water to the root depth, the soil type that you have, and don't do it more often than you need to. That's good, and it gets a good competition out there. The grass will do well, and the weeds don't have as much moisture sitting there to help them germinate. It gets kind of dry in between. The grass already has roots. Now, so when you're putting up a brand new lawn, you have to water it like 3 times a day, right? Especially Kentucky bluegrass, you water it 3 times a day it takes 21 days for Kentucky bluegrass to germinate. So you have to water it. Not very much, just a little bit, because you want to keep that seed moist. But as it gets established, when the grass gets established and you got those deeper roots, you definitely don't have to water it that often. You back off your watering, you let the roots grow deep, and then it's competing against the weeds, and the weeds don't get that footing. So deep, infrequent irrigation. All right. Too little of irrigation, your roots are going to be deep. They're going to be searching for the water, so they'll be deep, but the grass itself will not be lush and will not fill in, and so you'll get exposure to the soil where the seeds, when they germinate, those weed seeds, when they germinate, will pop up, and they'll be able to reach out and get to the sunlight, and then you got weed problems. So too little irrigation is not good. Now, too much irrigation again, the grass roots are going to be shallow, and the soil is going to be moist a lot, and so your weed seeds are going to be more likely to germinate. And then too little, too often is kind of the same thing. I mean, you still get kind of deep roots there, but you're because they're searching for water, but you're too often, so you're just kind of watering the top couple of inches of the soil. Again, you don't get a really good full lawn, and so that all has an effect on the ability of weeds to get a foothold in our lawns. So prevention is always the best choice when it comes to weeds, if we can prevent them from getting here. Now, I was out in my backyard. What day is it? Today's one day. On Monday, I was out in my backyard Monday doing my garden stuff, and I found a weed there that I have not seen before. Now, granted, I've only been here for a year, but I did not see it last year. I had leafy spurge in my backyard, one plant. So I dug it up, and fortunately, looking at it, it looks like it hadn't been spreading out. The rhizomes hadn't spread out much, and so hopefully I've got that under control. But if we can keep those from going to seed, that does a lot for it. I know where my bindweed are. I've got bindweed, a couple of spots where I have bindweed in my yard. If I keep that from getting spreading, it's actually spreading from the neighbors, so I'm not sure how I'm going to keep it from spreading. But anyway, so again, weeds not good neighbors make, and so frequent deep irrigation is optimal for weed control from the irrigation management point of view. Okay, now, when we talk about weed control, the drought-stressed weeds, they do not take in the herbicide very well. They're difficult to kill. They're not actively translocating, and so the herbicide may get into the system a little bit, but it's not going to be moving back and forth like we need it to. So we want actively growing weeds. We want the good herbicide uptake, rapid translocation, and that's when we'll get better kill with the herbicides. Okay, prevention's really good. If we can get competition from the lawn, that's kind of a cultural kind of a thing. If we can do that, that's really good. That helps to get weeds under control. One of the best things you can do, if you have bindweed, field bindweed in your lawn, one of the best things you can do is proper fertilization, proper mowing, and proper irrigation. You do that, the field bindweed will pretty much disappear. You keep it from going to seed, and it'll just kind of sit down there. And it's not going to totally disappear because it'll find its way back up. If you were to stop doing those things, all of a sudden it'd pop back up again. But those kinds of things will really help with your weed control. Dandelions are a little bit different. You can go out there and you can get them out with a dandelion digger. You can do the herbicides and those kinds of things. So you've got some mechanical things that you can do. But when we get to herbicides, then we want a good, healthy, growing plant. It's easier to kill them that way. So two different ways. We talked a little bit in the poll. We mentioned the pre-emergent herbicides. Those are, what they do is you put this pre-emergent herbicide out, and it creates a chemical barrier in the top layers of the soil. So when the seeds germinate, it kills that germinating seedling. So your lawns, which are perennial, they can tolerate that. They're already grown past that. They're not a germinating seedling. And so the pre-emergent type herbicides will do a good job on killing some of your annual weed problems, especially they've got to be applied. For the most part, they need to be applied. Sometimes you'll get a little bit of post-emergence control on the young seedlings, but they really should be applied before the weeds germinate. For your summer annuals, then, your application time would be different than your winter annuals, because winter annuals germinate in the fall, summer annuals germinate in the spring to early summer. So if you have black medic, which is a summer annual in your lawn, a pre-emergent should be put down in the springtime, probably before now. Like about the time the forsythia bloom is a good time, pretty good timing for a pre-emergent for most of our summer annuals. Now there's some that are a little bit later, purslane, some of those will germinate a little bit later, but your crabgrass and your black medic, our summer annuals, they'll germinate if you put that herbicide down, the pre-emergent down, about the time the forsythia are blooming. That will do a lot to control the germination of those seeds. In the winter annuals, though, like your annual bluegrass and some of those other mustards and things like that, they germinate in the fall. So your application for that would probably be early September to control most of those So you kind of have to know what weeds you're dealing with and apply based on that timing for those particular, if you're going to be doing, especially annuals, not very effective on perennials, all right? Because they're already there, like the grasses, they're already, it may control any germinating seedlings, but the dandelions are there. And so those dandelions that are already there will still already be there. The bindweed, again, if this is your method of controlling the bindweed, it's already there. It may control the germinating seedlings of the bindweed, but the perennialized plant is already there. So it's not very effective on these pre-emergent herbicides. It will control many of your annual grasses and broadleaf weeds, the annuals, okay? Now, there are a few that would be a little bit more resistant to that, but that does a pretty good job on most of those annuals. All right, there are both liquid and granular formulations. And so some things that may cause these to fail would be poor turf conditions. You don't have a very good full turf. Your high rainfall, too much rain washes it down past the germination point zone. And so you get the herbicides actually down beyond that. So read the label. Irrigate, if it says put down a 1/2 inch of irrigation after application, then put down a 1/2 inch, don't put down 3 inches, okay? Poor distribution of the herbicides, if you're not getting it spread out evenly, that could have some effect on there. Insufficient moisture, if you're not getting enough moisture down there to get that active zone built up there. And if you're going to aerate before you put down the pre-emergence, okay? Because if you put down a pre-emergence and then come through and aerate, you just broken that chemical barrier. So make sure you aerate before the application so that you don't get that failure. Okay, so here are some examples of the pre-emergent herbicides. There's Sonalan, there's trifluralin, the dithiopyr, prodamine. Anyway, all those funny names. So the examples in dimension, barricade, pre-em, pendulum, gallery, lots of different names for these products. These are the chemicals, the active ingredients that you're looking for. Trifluralin is another one that probably should be in there. Benylin is probably another one. So just make sure that it's labeled for lawns. When you read the label, read and follow the label. Always read and follow the label. So read the label, make sure it is labeled for lawns and it's labeled for the weeds that you're trying to control. All right, now post-emergent, that's the herbicides that you would be putting on after the weeds show up. So if you're going to be doing post-emergent, especially like on dandelions, you don't want to apply the herbicide until after you've mowed it, a couple of days. Give yourselves, after mowing, give yourself a couple of days. Don't go mow and then immediately apply it, because you're going to have a lot less leaf surface that you're applying to. And so let it go for a couple of days, then apply the herbicide, and then don't mow for at least 3 more days. Okay, so it's kind of a timing thing. That way you get time for it to translocate down to the roots and kill them out. It takes time for that to happen. And so you've got to allow that time with your mowing. All right. You want to make sure that your grasses and your weeds are not stressed again, so that you get good translocation through the weeds, and the grasses are not going to be adversely affected by the post-emergent herbicide. Your perennial weeds, usually the best time to apply your post-emergent herbicide is in the fall for perennial weeds, because that's when the plant gets this signal that, oh, it's getting wintertime, the days are getting shorter and nights are getting colder. And so they get this signal to bring the carbohydrates down and store them in the roots. So most perennials store their energy through the wintertime in the roots. And so they're pulling these carbohydrates down into the roots. And so fall is a really good time for most of these post-emergent herbicides. So here's some examples then. Your throughway products have a combination of 2,4-D, Mecoprop or MCPP, and dicamba. Now these are all 3 growth hormones. And what they are, basically what they do is they make the plant grow to death. And so they're synthetic growth hormones. It can take a little bit of time to see the results. So you put it down and you still got dandelions out there. Oh man, it's not working. Give yourself a little bit of time. and you'll see that eventually they'll kind of get knocked out pretty good. Some examples then would be Weed Be Gone, Max, Trimec, and many others. Now, this Weed Be Gone, there's one Weed Be Gone that has dicamba in it, and another Weed Be Gone that has triclopyr in it, Triclopyr, triclopyr. The triclopyr is a brush killer. Dicamba also has a fair amount of soil activity. Both of those have a fair amount of soil activity, and so you have to be careful when you're applying those in an area where you have trees and shrubs, tree and shrub roots, because there's soil activity. They'll get down into the soil and they can be taken up by the plant, by the trees and shrubs, rather than just by the weeds that you're trying to kill. So you have to be careful with these. The 2,4-D and Mecoprop, not so much. A little bit of soil activity, but not like the dicamba and the triclopyr. So, and keep in mind also that tree roots are going to be, the drip line, they say don't apply within the drip line. Well, the drip line is where most of the feeder roots are. The tree roots are going to be as far away from the tree as the tree is tall, typically, and even farther than that. It's amazing how far those roots reach. So you really need to be careful of trees and shrubs around when you're applying these herbicides. And high temperature, 2,4-D, dicamba are quite volatile when it gets hot, and they'll volatilize, they'll lift up off the plant, and they will drift over to a non-target plant. And if you're anywhere close to grapes or tomatoes, you'll see a lot of wilting, a lot of curling. I see people send me pictures of what's happened to mine. Well, that looks a lot like 2,4-D damage. Well, I haven't sprayed any 2,4-D. Well, your neighbor did or something, because it volatilizes and it'll drift a long ways. It can drift a long ways on an inversion. So my recommendation is use these products in the spring and in the fall, not during the hot part of the summer. During the hot part of the summer, almost all of your lawn weed control products are going to be fairly volatile. I would not do that. When it starts, you've got at least 3 days after application that it needs to stay below 85 degrees, or they'll start volatilizing and they'll hit non-target plants. So I see a lot of that anymore, a lot more than I thought I would. People seeing all this damage. Well, I haven't sprayed it. Well, somebody in your neighborhood has. And so be careful with that. Now, there's also a four-way product. It has the same 2,4-D, MCPP, and dicamba in it, but also has one of these others, a carfentrazone or sulfentrazone or pyraflufen ethyl. Those are another possible product that's in there. These, you'll actually see a lot of wilt down occur within 24 hours. Now, the question I have is, okay, you burn down the top, but are you getting a good translocation down into the roots? So I'm not sure I like this particular product, but you can try it if you want. Again, hot temperatures, the tops may be killed, but not the roots when it's hot and actively growing like that. So you want to slow things down. Do it in a cool time of the spring, cool time of the fall, and then during the summertime, just try to keep a good, healthy lawn. Some of the examples and names: Speed Zone or Weed Free Zone, 4-Speed, 4-Seed XT, Surge, and others have those combination of herbicides in there. Again, high temperature issues. It's got the dicamba in there. It's got the 2,4-D in there. And I don't know how volatile these particular products are, but it still has those volatile dicamba and 2,4-D in there. Okay, now one more weed to talk about. If you have perennial grasses and you want to get rid of them, I'm sorry. It's extremely difficult. So if you got grassy perennial weeds in your lawn, like quackgrass is in my lawn. This is a picture of my grass. I got nice bluegrass here, and then I've got this quackgrass here. You see, I must have a pretty sharp blade in there because I don't have a little bit of browning on the tips of those, but it doesn't tear it really bad. So it must have been just after I sharpened my blade this last time. Okay, so things that you could do, probably not with quackgrass, but glyphosate, you can apply glyphosate and spot treat those places. Now, this works fairly well with clump type grasses, a pasture fescue or a orchard grass or something, and I've got orchard grass in my lawn. If it used to be a farmer's field, you're more than likely going to have orchard grass in your lawn. And so they're a clump. And so you can kill the clump, you take that out, and you can level that out and let the bluegrass grow in. But in the meantime, while the bluegrass is trying to grow in, other weeds are coming in. So you could try seeding it. Just keep in mind that you got to keep it wet regularly for that. You could try sodding it. If it's going to be the same variety, you may end up with these funny dark green patches or light green patches that aren't the same color as the one that you got there. So it's okay. You just have to be aware of those particular issues. You can do mechanical removal, dig them out and put in another sod spot with a shovel. That works okay with these clumpy type grasses. It does not work with quackgrass. Quackgrass does not clump. Or you may just learn to tolerate. You can see that this is my lawn again. You can see I've got some perennial grasses over here and a little bit over there and some spots there. I'm okay with that. It's really hard. Quackgrass is it's got a rhizome. Well, bluegrass does too. It's got a rhizomatous stem that grows through, and it will pop up throughout. And so if it's clumping, it's probably not quackgrass. If it's showing up throughout the lawn, then you're probably dealing with quackgrass. And the only way to do, well, there are a couple things. Quackgrass grows a little faster than the bluegrass does. So you could, there's a product that's kind of like a deodorant stick with glyphosate in it. You can buy one of those and wear your nitrile or latex gloves, and you can rub those on the quackgrass leaves. Now, I've got some, I haven't used it yet. I've got to try it and see how really well it works. The other option you can do is put your nitrile glove on. They put on one of those brown, we call them jersey gloves, the brown cloth gloves, and you get the glyphosate, like the 48% kills all or Roundup, 51% Roundup, or whatever it is, and get that on the glove, and then just wipe the blade of the quackgrass with that on the glove. Okay, and you can use that kind of as your wick on the grass blade. You don't want to put on a whole lot there, but it's an option if you're dealing with that kind of a grass. If you've got it throughout your lawn, you can try it. It's not going to get any worse by doing it that way. So those are some options. Okay. Now, one more thing I would like to talk about, and that's aeration versus power raking. The reason for aeration, first of all, or even power raking, is to remove or reduce thatch. Now, thatch is not a bad thing unless it gets too thick. If you thatch, and you have to look and see it, if it's just the dying of the grass blades and things like that, you probably, I have very seldom seen a thatch problem. But I did a lot of power raking when I was going to school too, to put myself through school. Anyway, so the thatch, if it gets over ½ thick, then it starts to reduce the amount of water that's getting to the roots, and it's blocking the movement of the fertilizers and things like that. And so in that case, then doing something to reduce the thatch is very helpful. Aeration is better than power raking. Now, I spent a lot of time as a kid raking my dad's lawn. That's one of those things he had us doing. And so we'd rake that whole 15,000 square feet of lawn every spring. We'd do the whole thing. Again, I think it was to keep us busy, out of trouble or something like that. But I did buy a power rake, and I did a lot of lawns that way. Power rake the lawns. The problem with the power rake is, yes, it pulls up the thatch. It does a really good job with that. But then it's opened up the ground between the grass blades to seed germination. So you can have a lot more weed problems with power raking. With aerating, it's punching down, and you want to make sure that you use the hollow core aerators. You can use the aerator when you open up those cores, and you can add organic matter and top dress with organic matter, peat moss and things like that. Get that down into those holes, and that will add organic matter to your soil. Use it for solving compaction problems. Now, it's very important if you're going to aerate that you use a hollow core aerator. That's the kind that leaves these plugs on top of the lawn. If you don't, if you use a steel spike kind of aerator, what that does is it compacts the soil around that hole. And so you've actually increased the compaction. You haven't solved compaction problems at all. So you're use the core aerator, not the spike type aerators. You know, those golf shoes with long spikes, don't use those. Those don't solve the problem. They just kind of exacerbate the problem. And so use the core type aerators. If you have night crawlers, you don't need to aerate. They're doing the job for you. Okay. Some people, oh, you got to aerate every year or twice a year. That's foolishness in my opinion. The night crawlers, the living organisms in there, if you've got a good open soil, now if you have compaction areas, yeah, your aeration is probably necessary. If you've got the night crawlers and the night crawler bumps that you have to deal with, you're walking across there a little bit uneven, makes it fun for the kids, falling off the hill, king of bunkers hill kind of a thing. So anyway, if you've got night crawlers and worms in your soil, they're doing the aeration for you. You don't need that. All right. But aeration does not make up for poor lawn care practices. If you're not fertilizing, mowing, and irrigating properly, aeration is not a substitute for those things. Okay? Any questions? That's it for me.
Ron, I have a quick question out of interest's sake.
Okay.
So I was in the irrigation store earlier this week, and they had signs up everywhere about taking care of the bill bugs now. But I've never really heard of them being much of an issue around here. So is that a hot topic or?
Well, I have my own philosophy. Sometimes, yeah, if you have a history of bill bugs in your lawn, you might want to do that. Here's the problem. Every time we put out a pesticide, we are throwing nature out of balance. There are things that go out there and they'll eat those bill bug grubs and things like that. If you have an issue, yeah, take care of it. If you don't worry about it until it shows up. Okay, so yeah.
It looks like someone else wanted to ask a question.
Okay, Mary's got her hand raised, looks like.
So we're the ones with that were on the orchard.
Okay.
So who do we go, and we're in Pullman. So do we go to the extension and ask someone to come and look and say, should we just start over?
That would probably be the best thing. Without seeing, it's hard for me to make any particular specific recommendations. But yeah, the extension service, they've got good horticulturists up there in Whitman County, and so.
Yeah. And does heat, I've seen those little torches that you can take out in your lawn and get rid of weeds. Would that work?
The heat, the burners, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, the burners work good on seedlings. Okay. They don't work good on grass. The grass grow point is down low, and so usually you're not going to kill the grass, but you'll knock it back quite a bit and it'll turn brown, and so then the weeds would be kind of coming back in competition with the grass. So for using it in a lawn itself, I wouldn't typically recommend. Now we used to burn a lot of the dead grass in pastures. We would burn the pasture grass a little bit, and that would allow things to green up pretty early in the springtime, but you're losing a lot of organic matter from your soil too doing that. So.
Okay. So go out and weed.
Yeah, the best weed control method for almost every weed is hand labor.
Okay.
Having 9 boys or something like that.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.